The blazing Arizona sun cast long shadows across the dusty yard as Nora Bailey squinted through the hazy afternoon light. A lone figure caught her attention, a man struggling to walk, his right leg dragging behind him as he made his way toward the barn. Blood stained his worn denim pants, and his face was twisted in pain despite his obvious attempts to hide it. It was 1876, and in Wildrose Creek, strangers were viewed with suspicion, especially those who appeared as if they might bring trouble. Nora wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and stepped out onto the porch of her modest homestead. At 26, she had already endured more hardship than most women twice her age. After losing her parents to typhoid 3 years prior, she had managed to keep their small ranch operating against all odds in a place where a woman alone was considered vulnerable prey. "Sir," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. "You're injured. Let me help you." The man stopped, his broad shoulders tensing beneath his dust-covered shirt. He turned slowly, revealing a handsome face framed by dark hair that fell just past his collar. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, narrowed as he assessed her. "I don't need pity, madam," he said, his voice low and rough. He shifted his weight, wincing as he tried to stand straighter. Nora descended the porch steps, approaching him with determined strides. "I'm offering help, not pity. There's a difference." She gestured toward his bloodied leg. "Unless you prefer to bleed out in my yard and become buzzard food by morning." A hint of amusement crossed his face before pain replaced it. "Direct, aren't you? I don't have time for niceties when someone's bleeding on my property." She moved closer, noting the pallor beneath his sun-bronzed skin. "I'm Nora Bailey. This is my ranch." He hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Vaughn Zimmerman." "Well, Mr. Zimmerman, you have two choices. Accept my help, or continue limping toward wherever you're headed and likely collapse before you get there." Vaughn glanced down at his leg, then back at the determined woman before him. "I've managed worse." "I'm sure you have," Nora replied, unimpressed. "But there's no medal for suffering needlessly." She gestured toward the house. "I have medical supplies inside, clean bandages, whiskey for disinfecting. Your pride won't stop infection from setting in." For a moment, he seemed ready to refuse again, but then his injured leg buckled slightly. He caught himself grimacing. "Fine," he conceded reluctantly. "But just to clean the wound. I'll be on my way after." Nora nodded, stepping closer to offer her shoulder for support. "That remains to be seen, Mr. Zimmerman." Vaughn hesitated before allowing his arm to drape across her shoulders. He was surprised by the strength in her slender frame as she helped bear his weight. Together they made their way slowly toward the house, his limp pronounced with each step. "How did it happen?" Nora asked as they reached the porch steps. "Disagreement with a man who had a knife," Vaughn answered tersely. "He disagreed with me living." Nora glanced at him, noting the hard set of his jaw. "And this man won't be disagreeing with anyone again." His words hung in the air between them. Nora had lived in the West long enough to understand what he wasn't saying. She nodded once, accepting his answer without judgment. Inside the modest but clean house, Nora directed him to a wooden chair in the kitchen. "Sit. I'll get what I need." Vaughn lowered himself gingerly onto the chair, his eyes taking in the surroundings. The house was simple but well-maintained. Curtains adorned the windows, and a few small touches of vase of wildflowers. A colorful quilt draped over a chair spoke of a woman trying to create beauty in a harsh land. Nora returned with a basin of water, bandages, and a bottle of whiskey. She knelt beside him, her face revealing nothing but focused determination. "I need to see the wound," she said matter-of-factly. Vaughn hesitated, then nodded, rolling up his torn pant leg to reveal a nasty gash along his calf. deep enough to be concerning but not life-threatening if properly tended. Nora assessed the wound with clinical detachment. "You're lucky. A little deeper and you'd have bled out before reaching my property." She poured whiskey onto a cloth. "This will hurt. I'm acquainted with pain, Miss Bailey." "Nora," she corrected, then pressed the alcohol-soaked cloth against the wound. Vaughn sucked in a sharp breath but made no other sound. His hands gripped the edges of the chair as she cleaned the wound thoroughly, removing dirt and debris with gentle but firm motions. "You've done this before," he observed through clenched teeth. "Out here, everyone learns basic doctoring or they don't survive long." She worked efficiently, her delicate hands at odds with the strength and confidence they displayed. "My father taught me. He was no doctor, but he knew enough to keep us patched up." "Your father, is he?" "Gone. 3 years now, both my parents." Her voice remained steady, but Vaughn noted the slight pause in her movements. "Typhoid. I'm sorry." Nora looked up briefly, surprised by the genuine sympathy in his voice. "Thank you." She returned to her task, threading a needle. "This needs stitches. I'll try to be quick." Vaughn nodded, bracing himself. As she worked, he studied her, the concentration furrowing her brow, the loose tendrils of honey-brown hair escaping her practical bun, the determination in her green eyes. Despite her youth, she carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had weathered storms. "You run this place alone?" he asked, partly to distract himself from the pain of the needle. "I have a ranch hand, Eduardo. He helps with the cattle and heavier work, comes by daily but doesn't live on the property." She tied off a stitch with practiced ease. "People thought I'd sell after my parents died, expected it, even. But you didn't." Her eyes flashed with defiance. "This land is all I have left of them. I wasn't about to hand it over to the men who have been circling like vultures, waiting for me to fail." Vaughn nodded, understanding. The West was brutal enough for men. For a woman alone, it was nearly impossible. Yet here she was, not just surviving but determined to thrive. "Your family?" Nora asked as she continued stitching. "Where are they?" Vaughn's expression hardened. "Don't have one anymore, not for many years." Nora absorbed this information silently, recognizing the pain behind the words. "Hold still," she murmured as she tied off the last stitch. "Almost done." She applied a salve to the wound before wrapping it in clean bandages. "There, keep it clean. Change the bandage daily. And stay off it as much as possible for a few days." Vaughn looked down at her handiwork, then back at her face. "You've been more than kind, Miss Nora. I should be going." Nora stood, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Going where exactly on that leg, in your condition? I've imposed enough." "Mr. Zimmerman, Vaughn," he corrected. "Vaughn," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "Night's falling. The nearest town is 15 miles away. You'd never make it before dark, and these parts aren't safe for a wounded man alone after sundown." He knew she was right, though it clearly pained him to admit it. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door." Nora crossed her arms. "Is trouble following you?" Vaughn hesitated, weighing his words. "Not immediately, but it has a way of finding me eventually." "Then we'll deal with it eventually." She gestured toward a small room off the kitchen. "That's where Eduardo sleeps when winter weather makes travel dangerous. The bed is clean. You can stay tonight, rest, and decide your next steps in the morning." Vaughn looked at her, genuinely puzzled. "Why would you help a stranger this way? You don't know me. I could be dangerous." Nora met his gaze steadily. "Are you planning to harm me in my sleep, Vaughn Zimmerman?" "No, madam." "Then that's settled." She turned to the stove. "I was making stew before you arrived, bleeding on my property." "You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days. Eat, rest, and we'll talk more tomorrow." Vaughn watched her move around the kitchen with efficient grace. In his 32 years, he'd rarely encountered such straightforward kindness without strings attached. It made him uneasy, not because he distrusted her specifically, but because experience had taught him that kindness often came with hidden costs. "Thank you," he finally said, the words feeling rusty in his mouth. "I'll be gone by midday tomorrow, and I'll find a way to repay your kindness." Nora glanced at him over her shoulder. "Just don't reopen those stitches and we'll call it even." As the evening progressed, they shared a simple but hearty meal. Conversation was sparse, with Vaughn offering little about himself beyond basic pleasantries. Nora didn't press, understanding the value of privacy in a land where many came to escape their pasts. After dinner, she showed him to the small room with its narrow but clean bed. "Rest well," she said, lingering in the doorway. "If you need anything in the night, more pain relief or water, just call out." Vaughn nodded, uncomfortable with her continued generosity. "I'll be fine. Thank you, Nora." She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Good night, Vaughn." Left alone, Vaughn eased himself onto the bed, wincing as his injured leg protested. He hadn't planned on stopping here, hadn't planned on stopping anywhere until he reached California. Yet fate, it seemed, had other ideas. He thought about the woman in the next room, so capable and unafraid. In his experience, people like Nora Bailey were rare, people who offered help without expectation, who stood their ground against all odds. Despite his best efforts to maintain emotional distance, he found himself admiring her. Morning would come soon enough, and with it, the necessity to move on. He couldn't afford to linger, not with the shadows that followed him. But for tonight, in this small room on a ranch owned by a remarkable woman, Vaughn Zimmerman allowed himself to feel something he hadn't experienced in years: safety. Dawn broke over the ranch with a chorus of roosters and the soft lowing of cattle in the distance. Vaughn woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Pain shot through his leg as he sat up, reminding him of yesterday's events and the woman who had tended his wound. He dressed carefully, testing his weight on the injured leg. It hurt, but the sharp, burning pain of yesterday had dulled to a manageable throb. Nora's handiwork had been skillful. The wound was clean and showed no signs of infection. When he emerged from the room, he found the kitchen empty but a pot of coffee warming on the stove. Through the window, he spotted Nora in the yard, feeding chickens and gathering eggs. Her movements were efficient, practiced the routine of someone who had performed these tasks countless times. Vaughn poured himself a cup of coffee and stepped outside, the morning air crisp against his face. Nora looked up as the door creaked open, offering a small nod in greeting. "How's the leg?" she asked, depositing the last of the corn for the chickens. "Better. Your doctoring skills are impressive." She tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Breakfast will be ready soon. There's fresh water for washing up by the pump." Vaughn nodded, feeling awkward in his gratitude. "I should be on my way after. I've imposed enough." Nora assessed him critically, her gaze lingering on his injured leg. "That wound needs at least 3 days of rest before you should be traveling far." "Where are you headed anyway?" "California," he admitted. "Thought I might try my luck there." "California will still be there in a few days," she said practically. Eduardo could use help with some repairs around the place. Nothing too strenuous that would damage your leg, but enough to earn your keep if that's what's bothering you. Vaughn studied her, trying to discern her motivation. "Why would you want me to stay?" Nora met his gaze directly. "Because you're injured, and despite your attempts to hide it, you're in no condition to travel. Because I could use the extra hands around here, and because—" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Because sometimes people just need a moment of kindness to get back on their feet." Her honesty disarmed him. In a world where ulterior motives were the norm, her straightforward compassion was unexpected. 3 days, he conceded. I'll help with whatever needs doing that won't slow your operation down. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. Good. Now go wash up. Eggs and biscuits will be ready soon. Over breakfast, Vaughn learned more about the ranch. Nora ran 30 head of cattle, had a small vegetable garden, and kept chickens and 2 milk cows. It was modest by ranching standards, but impressive for a woman managing largely on her own. Eduardo's been with us since I was 16, she explained, pouring more coffee. He's loyal, hardworking, but he's getting older and some tasks are becoming difficult for him. And no one else in town willing to help. A shadow crossed her face. There are those who'd help at the cost of my independence. The neighboring rancher, Maxwell Ward, has made it clear he'd be happy to take this place off my hands, preferably with me included in the bargain. Vaughn's jaw tightened. He'd encountered men like Ward before, men who viewed women as property to be acquired rather than people deserving respect. He's been persistent, increasingly so. Nora's voice remained steady, but Vaughn detected the underlying tension. Last month, 2 of my cattle mysteriously disappeared. The month before, my fence line was cut in 3 places. And you think Ward was responsible? I can't prove it, she said, frustration evident in her tone. But the timing is suspicious. He made an offer for the ranch the very day after the cattle went missing. Said it was becoming clear I couldn't manage on my own. Vaughn felt a surge of anger on her behalf. Men like that understand only one language. Nora's eyes flashed. I'm not selling and I'm not giving up. This land was my parents' dream. They worked themselves to the bone to build something here. She stood, collecting their empty plates. I may be a woman alone, but I'm not helpless. No, Vaughn agreed, watching her. You certainly are not. Eduardo arrived mid-morning, a weathered Mexican man in his 60s with kind eyes and a quiet dignity. He greeted Vaughn with cautious respect, his loyalty to Nora evident in the protective glances he cast her way as she explained Vaughn's temporary presence. The north fence needs mending, Eduardo said after introductions were complete, and the barn roof has a leak that needs patching before the next rain. Vaughn nodded. I can handle the roof. Legs injured, but my arms work fine. They spent the morning working, with Vaughn repairing the barn roof while Eduardo and Nora tended to the cattle. Despite his injury, Vaughn moved with the practiced efficiency of a man accustomed to physical labor. By midday, the roof was patched, and he'd identified several other minor repairs that needed attention. When Nora brought him water and a simple lunch of bread and cheese, she seemed pleased with his progress. You've done more in one morning than I expected. You've worked on ranches before. Vaughn accepted the water gratefully. Among other things, I've done whatever work was available, ranching, mining, even tried my hand at blacksmithing for a time. A man of many talents, she observed, sitting beside him in the shade of the barn. What drove you west? Vaughn was silent for a moment, weighing how much to reveal. War changed everything. After fighting for the Union, home didn't feel like home anymore. Nora studied his face, noting the hardness that entered his eyes when he spoke of the past. My father fought as well. He never spoke much about it, but it haunted him till the end. Some things are better left unspoken. Vaughn's voice was quiet but firm, closing the subject. Nora respected his boundary. The cattle need moving to the south pasture tomorrow. It's not strenuous work if you're on horseback. Your legs should manage if you're careful. I'll help, Vaughn agreed. Least I can do for your hospitality. As they finished their lunch, a cloud of dust on the horizon caught their attention. A rider was approaching the ranch at a steady pace. Nora stood, her expression tightening. That's Maxwell Ward's horse. Vaughn rose beside her, instinctively positioning himself slightly in front of her. Want me to make myself scarce? No, Nora said firmly. I have nothing to hide, and perhaps seeing I have help will discourage his more overt attempts at intimidation. The rider approached a large man with a thick mustache and expensive clothing that marked him as prosperous. He rode a fine chestnut stallion and carried himself with the arrogant confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. "Miss Bailey," he called as he dismounted, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. His eyes flickered to Vaughn, narrowing slightly. "I see you have company." "Mr. Ward," Nora acknowledged coolly. "What brings you to my property today?" Ward gestured expansively. "Just being neighborly. Noticed your north fence was damaged when I rode by yesterday. Thought I'd offer my men's assistance." "How thoughtful," Nora replied, her tone making it clear she found it anything but. "But Eduardo and Mr. Zimmerman have matters well in hand." Ward's attention shifted fully to Vaughn, assessing him with undisguised suspicion. "Don't believe we've met. Maxwell Ward, owner of the Diamond W Ranch." He extended his hand, a challenge in his eyes. Vaughn accepted the handshake, matching the other man's firm grip. "Vaughn Zimmerman." "Passing through. Staying long?" Ward's question carried an unmistakable edge. "Long enough," Vaughn replied evenly. Ward turned back to Nora, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Well, my offer stands, Miss Bailey, not just for help with the fence, but for the entire property. These lands are difficult for a woman alone. I could take the burden from your shoulders and offer a fair price. As I've told you before, Mr. Ward, this ranch is not for sale." Nora's voice was firm, her stance unyielding despite the fact that Ward towered over her. "Not now, not ever." Ward's friendly facade slipped momentarily, revealing the hard man beneath. "Everything has its price, Miss Bailey. It's only a matter of time before you realize that continuing alone is impractical." "Is that a threat, Mr. Ward?" Vaughn asked quietly, his hand casually moving to rest near his hip where a gun would typically be holstered. Ward noted the gesture and took a step back, his smile returning though his eyes remained cold. "Simply an observation, Mr. Zimmerman. The West is no place for sentimentality. Miss Bailey's parents were good people, but they're gone now. Practical considerations must prevail." "My practical consideration is that this land is mine," Nora stated, "and I intend to keep it that way." Ward shrugged, mounting his horse with practiced ease. "We'll speak again, Miss Bailey." "Good day to you." He nodded curtly to Vaughn. "Mr. Zimmerman." They watched him ride away, dust billowing behind his horse's hooves. "Charming neighbor," Vaughn commented dryly once Ward was out of earshot. "He's been trying to absorb my land into his ranch since before my parents died," Nora explained, her shoulders tense. "His methods have become more aggressive since I've been on my own." Vaughn studied her profile, noting the determination in her jaw despite the worry in her eyes. "Men like that don't stop easily. They're used to taking what they want." "Then he'll have to get used to disappointment." Nora turned to face him. "I appreciate you standing with me just now. You didn't have to involve yourself." Vaughn shook his head. "I know his type. They prey on those they perceive as weaker. Having another man present sometimes gives them pause." "I hate that it works that way," Nora said bitterly. "That my word alone isn't enough." "The world's unfair that way," Vaughn agreed. "But you're holding your ground admirably with or without help." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a moment of mutual respect and understanding that transcended their brief acquaintance. For the first time, Nora smiled fully, transforming her serious face into something luminous. "We should finish the north fence today," she said, breaking the moment, "just to spite him." Vaughn found himself returning her smile. "Lead the way." The remainder of the day passed in steady work. Despite his injured leg, Vaughn proved himself a capable and efficient worker. By sundown, the north fence was mended, the barn roof was secure, and several other small repairs had been completed around the property. When Eduardo departed for his own small cabin a few miles away, Nora and Vaughn returned to the house, tired but satisfied with the day's accomplishments. Over a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and coffee, conversation flowed more easily than the previous night. Vaughn found himself sharing stories of his travels across the West, carefully edited to omit the darker aspects of his past. Nora, in turn, spoke of her childhood on the ranch, of her father teaching her to ride and rope, and her mother insisting she learn to read and cipher despite the limited opportunities for formal education. "They wanted me to be prepared for anything," she explained, refilling their coffee cups. "Father taught me ranching and survival. Mother insisted I learn the refinements that might serve me in civilization." "They raised you well," Vaughn observed. "Most women, most people would have sold this place after facing such loss." Nora gazed into her coffee cup. "There were moments I considered it. The first winter alone was difficult, but you persevered." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "What other choice did I have? This is home, the only one I've ever known or wanted." Vaughn understood her attachment to the land. He'd spent years drifting, never allowing himself to form such connections. Yet he recognized the power of having roots, of belonging somewhere. "What about you?" Nora asked, her voice gentle. "Will California become home?" Vaughn considered the question. "I don't know. Never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home since the war. Always moving on." "It's safer that way," he admitted, then immediately regretted revealing even that much. Nora picked up on his meaning instantly. "Safer for you or for those around you?" Vaughn didn't answer immediately, surprised by her perception. "Both, perhaps." She studied him, her green eyes thoughtful. "Everyone has a past, Vaughn. Out here, most people are running from something or someone. It's why they come west. And you, what are you running from?" "Nothing," she said simply. "I'm standing my ground. That's the difference between us, I think." Her words struck him more deeply than she could know. Standing ground, forming attachments, these were luxuries he hadn't allowed himself in years. Yet watching her fight for her home stirred something within him, admiration, certainly, but also a forgotten longing for connection. "It's getting late," Nora said, rising from the table. "Tomorrow we'll move the cattle to the south pasture. It'll be easier with 3 of us." Vaughn nodded, grateful for the change in subject. "I'll be ready. Good night, Nora." "Good night, Vaughn." As he retired to the small room that was temporarily his, Vaughn reflected on the day's events. His original plan had been to stay only one night, yet now he found himself committed to at least 3 days on this small ranch with its remarkable owner. The rational part of him warned against forming attachments, against staying in one place too long. Yet another part, a part he thought long buried, felt drawn to the quiet strength of Nora Bailey and the peace he'd found, however temporarily, on her land. Morning arrived with the promise of a scorching day. By the time the sun had fully risen, Nora, Vaughn, and Eduardo were mounted and ready to move the cattle to the south pasture, where fresher grazing awaited. Nora had provided Vaughn with a steady gelding, a bay with a white blaze that responded well to minimal guidance. Vaughn's injured leg protested as he mounted, but once seated in the saddle, the pain subsided to a manageable level. He caught Nora watching him with concern. "I'll manage," he assured her before she could ask. She nodded, turning her attention to the task at hand. "Eduardo will take the lead. I'll ride flank on the left, you on the right. Keep them moving south and watch for stragglers." Vaughn was impressed by her command of the operation. She sat her horse with the ease of someone born to the saddle, her slender frame belying the strength needed to control the spirited mare she rode. With her hair braided and tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat, dressed in practical riding clothes, she exuded competence and quiet authority. They worked well together, the three of them guiding the small herd along the familiar route to the south pasture. Though only 30 head, the cattle required constant vigilance to keep them moving in the right direction. Vaughn found himself watching Nora as much as the cattle, admiring the fluid way she moved with her horse, anticipating the animal's behavior before they broke from the herd. Midway through the drive, a young calf became separated from its mother, veering toward a patch of brush. Vaughn immediately redirected his horse, cutting off the calf's escape. As he maneuvered the animal back toward the herd, he caught Nora's approving glance. "You've done this before," she called over the sound of lowing cattle. "A time or two," he confirmed with a hint of a smile. By midday, they had successfully moved the cattle to the lush south pasture. They dismounted near a small stream to water the horses and take a brief rest. Eduardo unpacked a simple lunch of jerky, dried fruit, and cornbread from his saddlebags, which they shared in the shade of a gnarled oak tree. "The cattle look healthy," Vaughn observed, accepting a canteen from Nora. "We've been fortunate this year," she replied. "Good rain in the spring, decent grazing. If prices hold through the fall drive, it should be a profitable year." "You drive them to market yourself," Nora nodded. "Eduardo and I, along with 2 hired hands from town. It's a small operation compared to most, but we manage." Eduardo, who had been quietly eating his lunch, spoke up. "Miss Nora is respected at the market. Buyers know her cattle are well-tended, healthy." Pride was evident in the old man's voice, and Vaughn could see why. What Nora had accomplished was remarkable by any standard, but especially for a woman in the male-dominated world of cattle ranching. As they finished their meal, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders appeared on the ridge above the pasture, silhouetted against the sky. Even at a distance, Vaughn recognized Maxwell Ward's substantial frame. "He's not alone this time," Nora observed, her voice tightening as she stood. "His foreman, Dawson, and one of his hands," Eduardo supplied, his weathered face creasing with concern. The 3 men rode down the slope toward them, Ward in the lead. They reined in a few yards away, Ward's cold eyes taking in the scene before settling on Nora. "Miss Bailey," he greeted her, ignoring Vaughn and Eduardo, "I see you're moving your cattle." "As I do every summer, Mr. Ward," Nora replied evenly. "Is there something I can help you with?" Ward dismounted, his boots raising dust as he approached. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. Perhaps I wasn't clear enough about the seriousness of my offer." "You were perfectly clear," Nora countered. "As was my response." Ward's face hardened. "You should reconsider. Things happen to small operations like yours. Cattle go missing, water sources dry up, accidents occur." He glanced meaningfully at Eduardo and then at Vaughn. "Help is unreliable these days." Vaughn stepped forward, his posture relaxed but his eyes vigilant. "Sounds like you're predicting trouble, Ward." "Simply stating facts, Zimmerman." Ward's gaze shifted back to Nora. $5,000 for the entire property. "That's more than fair, considering the challenges you face." "The property isn't for sale," Nora stated firmly. "Not to you, not to anyone." Ward's 2 companions had remained mounted, watching the exchange with calculated interest. The tension in the air was palpable, hanging heavy in the summer heat. "You're making a mistake," Ward said, his voice dropping to a near growl. "A woman has no business running a ranch alone. Your father would understand the practicality of my offer." "My father," Nora replied, her voice tight with controlled anger, "taught me to stand my ground against bullies and thieves. I believe he would be quite clear on what to do with your offer, Mr. Ward." Ward's face flushed with anger. He took a menacing step toward Nora, but Vaughn moved between them, his hand resting casually near his belt. "I think it's time for you to leave," Vaughn said quietly. Ward measured him with his eyes, calculating the threat. After a tense moment, he stepped back. "This isn't over, Miss Bailey. One way or another, that land will be part of the Diamond W." He remounted his horse with deliberate slowness. "Think carefully about my offer. It won't remain open indefinitely." With that, he wheeled his horse around, his men following as they rode back the way they had come. Once they were out of earshot, Eduardo spat on the ground. "Evil man," he muttered. "He has wanted this land since before your father died, Miss Nora." Nora's composure wavered slightly, her hands trembling before she clenched them into fists. "He's becoming bolder." "He's testing boundaries," Vaughn observed, watching the retreating riders. "Men like Ward don't stop until they're forced to." "What would you suggest?" Nora asked, turning to face him. "I can't outgun him or outspend him." Vaughn considered carefully before answering. "For now, vigilance. Don't work alone. Keep your rifle close." He paused. "And document everything: missing cattle, cut fences, threats. The law may be slow out here, but it still exists." Nora nodded, straightening her shoulders. "We should finish checking the south fence line before heading back. I won't let him drive me off my routine." Her resilience impressed Vaughn. Where many would have been intimidated by Ward's threats, she remained determined to continue with her work and her life. As they mounted their horses to resume their tasks, Vaughn found himself increasingly reluctant to consider leaving as planned. Ward presented a genuine threat, one that Nora and Eduardo might not be able to handle alone. The remainder of the afternoon passed without incident as they inspected the fence line surrounding the south pasture. By the time they returned to the ranch house, the sun was setting, painting the landscape in hues of gold and crimson. Eduardo departed for his own cabin after ensuring the horses were properly tended, leaving Nora and Vaughn alone at the main house. As they prepared a simple supper together, Vaughn noticed Nora repeatedly glancing out the window toward the approach to the ranch. "He won't come tonight," Vaughn said, correctly interpreting her concern. "Men like Ward prefer to let their threats simmer, create anxiety before acting." Nora turned from the window, a rueful smile touching her lips. "Am I that transparent, cautious?" Vaughn corrected. "As you should be." She sighed, returning to the stove where a pot of stew simmered. "I hate feeling this way, jumping at shadows in my own home." "It's not weakness to acknowledge danger," Vaughn said, setting plates on the table. "Just good sense." They ate supper in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. As Nora cleared the table afterward, Vaughn finally voiced the question that had been troubling him since Ward's threats. "What will you do if he escalates, beyond threats to actual harm?" Nora paused, her back to him as she stood at the wash basin. "Fight," she said simply, turning to face him. "This land is all I have, all my parents left me. I won't abandon it. Even if it puts you in danger, some things are worth the risk." She studied him curiously. "Surely you fought for something you believed in, something that mattered." Vaughn thought of the war, of the ideals he'd once held that had gradually been eroded by years of violence and loss. Long ago, perhaps. Nora dried her hands on a towel, her gaze steady. "And now? Is there nothing you would stand and fight for?" The question struck deeper than she could know. For years, Vaughn had avoided attachments, had drifted from place to place, taking care of immediate problems but never putting down roots, never allowing himself to care too deeply. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "I've been running so long, I'm not sure I remember how to stand still." Nora moved closer, her expression softening. "You stood between me and Ward today. That counts for something." Their eyes met, and Vaughn felt an unexpected connection, a pull toward this woman who faced life's challenges with such unwavering determination. He found himself wanting to protect her, not because she seemed helpless, but because her courage deserved to be honored and preserved. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotions. Finally, Nora stepped back, breaking the tension. "It's been a long day," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "We should rest. Morning comes early." Vaughn nodded, suddenly aware of how close they had been standing. "Good night, Nora." "Good night, Vaughn." She paused at the doorway to her room. "Thank you for today." After she had gone, Vaughn remained at the table, nursing a final cup of coffee. His plan to leave the following day suddenly seemed impossible to contemplate. Ward's threats weren't idle. Men like him followed through when their demands weren't met. The thought of Nora facing such dangers alone troubled him more deeply than he cared to admit. For the first time in years, Vaughn Zimmerman found himself contemplating staying in one place, allowing himself to form attachments. It was dangerous for him and potentially for Nora, but the alternative, leaving her vulnerable to Ward's machinations, seemed increasingly unacceptable. With these troubling thoughts, Vaughn finally retired to his temporary room, his injured leg aching from the day's exertions but his mind far more troubled by the decisions that lay ahead. The next morning brought a fresh challenge. Eduardo arrived at dawn, his face grave as he delivered news that made Nora's face pale with anger and concern. 2 more cattle missing, the ranch hand reported as they stood in the yard. And the water pump for the north pasture has been damaged, deliberately. Nora's jaw tightened. "Ward's work." "No proof," Eduardo cautioned, "but yes, I believe so." Vaughn, who had been examining the damage to the pump, straightened. This wasn't random vandalism. Someone knew exactly how to disable it with minimal effort. He pointed to the crucial component that had been removed. "Professional job." Nora paced the yard, frustration evident in every line of her body. "He's escalating, testing how far he can push before I break." "What's your next move?" Vaughn asked, watching her carefully. She stopped pacing, her decision made. "We repair the pump, count the remaining cattle, and continue as normal. I won't give him the satisfaction of seeing me rattled." "And the missing cattle, we report it to Sheriff Collins in town," she said firmly. "Not that he's likely to do much. He and Ward are friendly." Throughout the day, they worked to repair the water pump and check on the remaining cattle. Vaughn noticed Nora growing increasingly quiet as the hours passed, her face set in determined lines that couldn't fully mask her worry. As evening approached, Vaughn made his decision. His planned departure would have to wait. He couldn't leave Nora to face Ward's intimidation alone. When he told her he would stay another week to help with the ranch and keep an eye on Ward's activities, the relief in her eyes was palpable, though she tried to hide it behind practical concerns. "Your leg still needs healing," she said, as if providing him with an excuse. "And we could use the help with harvest preparations." "Then it's settled," he replied simply. 1 week stretched into 2 as Vaughn found increasingly necessary tasks around the ranch. His leg healed steadily under Nora's careful attention, and with each passing day, he found himself more drawn to the quiet strength of the woman who had taken him in when he was injured and vulnerable. They fell into an easy routine, working alongside Eduardo during the day, sharing quiet suppers in the evening where conversation gradually became more personal, more revealing. Vaughn found himself sharing carefully edited stories from his past, while Nora spoke of her hopes for the ranch's future and memories of her parents. Ward's harassment continued in small, persistent ways. A section of fence damaged here, tracks of unknown riders near the cattle there, but nothing as overt as his direct confrontation. Vaughn suspected the man was biding his time, perhaps waiting to see if Vaughn would move on. One evening, nearly 3 weeks after Vaughn had arrived bleeding on Nora's property, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. A comfortable silence had settled between them, broken only by the occasional call of a night bird. "Why California?" Nora asked suddenly, turning to look at him. Of all places to start fresh, Vaughn considered the question, realizing he'd never fully examined his own motivations. "I've heard it's a place where the past matters less than what a man can do in the present. Where the land is still open and opportunities abound." "Is that what you want? Opportunity, I want." He paused, finding it difficult to articulate desires he'd suppressed for so long. "Peace, perhaps. A place where the ghosts are quieter." Nora nodded, understanding in her eyes. "We all have ghosts. Some more persistent than others," Vaughn admitted. He looked out across the ranch that Nora had fought so hard to maintain. "You've built something remarkable here. Most would have failed or given up." "There were times I almost did," she confessed. "That first winter after my parents died, I'd never felt so alone. But each morning the work remained. The animals needed tending, fences needed mending. The routine saved me as much as my determination." Vaughn understood. After the war, it had been the constant movement, the next job, the next town that had kept him functioning when memories threatened to overwhelm him. "Will you tell me what you're running from?" Nora asked softly. "I think I've earned that trust by now." Vaughn was silent for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. "After the war, I drifted, took work where I could find it. In Wyoming, I was hired as security for a cattle operation. The owner was ruthless, driving smaller ranchers out, claiming water rights that weren't his." "Like Ward," Nora observed. "Worse than Ward," Vaughn corrected. "When ranchers resisted, accidents happened. I didn't ask questions at first, just did my job, until—" He paused, the memory still sharp despite the years. "Until I was ordered to burn out a family. Man, woman, 3 young children." Nora's intake of breath was audible in the stillness. "I refused," Vaughn continued. "Tried to warn them instead. My employer didn't take kindly to disloyalty. There was a fight. Men died, men who had been my colleagues. I've been moving ever since, staying ahead of the reputation and the bounty hunters." "You're wanted?" Nora asked, her voice steady despite the revelation. "In Wyoming. For murders I didn't commit." His hands tightened on the porch railing. "The man I worked for had connections, made it look like I was responsible for deaths that were on his orders." "That's why you've never stayed anywhere long," Vaughn nodded. "Safer for everyone that way." Nora was quiet for a moment, absorbing his story. When she finally spoke, her voice was firm. "Thank you for telling me, for trusting me." Vaughn turned to look at her, surprised by her reaction. "Most people would show me the door after hearing that." "I'm not most people," she replied simply. "And I know something about being judged unfairly. Being a woman alone in these parts has taught me to look beyond appearances and rumors to the truth of a person." In the fading light, her face was partially shadowed, but her eyes held his steadily, without fear or judgment. Vaughn felt something shift within him, a wall beginning to crumble, a defensive posture he'd maintained for years starting to ease. "You're a remarkable woman, Nora Bailey," he said softly. She smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed her serious face. "And you, Vaughn Zimmerman, are not nearly as dangerous as you think you are. At least, not to those who deserve your loyalty." Their eyes held in the gathering dusk, and Vaughn felt the pull between them strengthen. Without conscious thought, he reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on the porch railing. Her fingers were work-roughened but warm, and they turned beneath his to intertwine with his own. For a suspended moment, they remained thus connected, neither speaking but communicating volumes in their silence. Then the distant sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the spell, causing them both to straighten and turn toward the road. A single rider approached at a steady pace, his silhouette unfamiliar against the darkening sky. Vaughn instinctively moved slightly in front of Nora, his hand moving toward the revolver he now wore openly at his hip. As the rider drew closer, Vaughn could make out a badge glinting on the man's chest, the local sheriff. Beside him, Nora stiffened. "Sheriff Collins," she called as the man reined in his horse. "What brings you out this way so late?" The sheriff, a broad-shouldered man with a salt and pepper mustache, dismounted slowly. His eyes moved from Nora to Vaughn, lingering on their still clasped hands before they quickly separated. "Evening, Miss Bailey." He tipped his hat, then nodded to Vaughn. "Sir, don't believe we've met." "Vaughn Zimmerman," Vaughn supplied, stepping forward to shake the sheriff's hand. "I've been helping around the ranch while my leg heals." The sheriff's gaze dropped to Vaughn's leg, then back to his face, assessing. "Been here a while, then?" "A few weeks," Vaughn confirmed, keeping his tone casual despite the wariness the lawman's presence inspired. Sheriff Collins nodded slowly. "I received a complaint about missing cattle from Maxwell Ward." Nora made a sound of disbelief. "Ward is complaining about missing cattle when I've lost 4 head in the past month to his sabotage." The sheriff held up a placating hand. "I'm not taking sides, Miss Bailey, just doing my job, looking into reports." He glanced at Vaughn again. "Ward mentioned you had a stranger staying with you. Suggested I might want to check if there were any wanted notices that matched your guest." Vaughn maintained a neutral expression despite the surge of alarm he felt. "Is that why you're here, Sheriff? To check my credentials?" "Partly," Collins admitted. "It's my job to know who's in my jurisdiction, especially those who appear suddenly and stay longer than expected." Nora stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "Mr. Zimmerman was injured when he arrived. I offered him shelter and work while he recovered." "There's nothing suspicious about that." The sheriff's expression softened slightly at Nora's defense. "I'm sure there isn't, Miss Bailey, but I'd be remiss not to follow up on concerns brought to my attention." He turned back to Vaughn. "Where were you before coming here, Mr. Zimmerman?" "New Mexico Territory," Vaughn answered truthfully. "Working cattle drives mostly." Collins studied him for a moment longer. "Well, I'll keep my ear to the ground. If anything comes up that might interest me regarding your background, I'll be back for a more thorough conversation." The implicit threat was clear, but Vaughn merely nodded. "Of course, Sheriff. I understand you're just doing your job. As for the cattle," Collins continued, turning back to Nora, "I'll look into both complaints. Though without witnesses or evidence, there's little I can do beyond taking statements." "Ward is trying to force me off my land," Nora stated bluntly. "First with offers, now with intimidation. Surely that warrants some official concern," Collins sighed, running a hand over his mustache. "Miss Bailey, I can't act on suspicions alone. If you have proof of Ward's involvement in any wrongdoing, bring it to me. Otherwise, my hands are tied." The frustration on Nora's face was evident, but she nodded stiffly. "I understand." The sheriff mounted his horse, settling into the saddle with the ease of a man who had spent most of his life on horseback. "Good evening to you both. Mr. Zimmerman, I expect we'll speak again soon." After he had ridden away, Nora turned to Vaughn, concern etched on her features. "Will he find anything?" "About Wyoming," Vaughn's jaw tightened. "Eventually, perhaps, if he's thorough or if Ward pushes him to dig deeper." "Then you should go," Nora said, though the words clearly cost her. "Tomorrow, before Collins returns with more questions." Vaughn studied her face in the deepening twilight. The thought of leaving now, when Ward's threats were escalating and when whatever was growing between them had just begun to take shape, was more painful than he had anticipated. Running now would only confirm any suspicions, he reasoned. Besides, I'm not leaving you to face Ward alone. I managed before you arrived, Nora reminded him, though without conviction, and now you don't have to. Vaughn stepped closer, his voice lowering. I'm not running anymore, Nora, not unless you tell me to go. Their eyes met, understanding passing between them without words. Whatever dangers lay ahead, Ward's threats, the sheriff's investigation, Vaughn's past, they would face them together. The following days brought increased tension as they waited for Ward's next move or the sheriff's return. Vaughn and Eduardo took turns keeping watch at night, while Nora insisted on maintaining normal operations during the day, refusing to show fear. Nearly a week after the sheriff's visit, Nora and Vaughn rode out together to check on the cattle in the south pasture. The late summer day was oppressively hot, the sun beating down from a cloudless sky. As they crested a rise overlooking the pasture, Nora suddenly reined in her horse, her body going rigid with shock. Below them, the normally placid stream that provided water for the cattle in the south pasture had been diverted. A hastily constructed dam redirected the water away from Nora's land toward the adjacent property Ward's land. He's damming the creek, Nora said, disbelief and anger mingling in her voice. That water source serves both properties. He can't just take it all. Vaughn studied the crude dam. It's on the property line, just barely on his side, Nora confirmed. But water rights are shared by adjacent properties according to territorial law. He knows this. They rode down to inspect the dam more closely. It was solid work, built to last and effectively cutting off the water supply to Nora's south pasture. Without this water source, the cattle would have to be moved, placing strain on the grazing available in other areas of the ranch. This is the final push, Nora said, dismounting to examine the structure more closely. He thinks if he controls the water, I'll have no choice but to sell. Vaughn dismounted beside her, his expression grim. It's a common tactic. Control the water, control the land. We need to report this to Sheriff Collins, Nora decided. This is clear violation of water rights. Vaughn nodded his agreement, though he doubted the sheriff would take action against a man as influential as Ward. We should move the cattle to the east pasture in the meantime. They'll need water soon in this heat. They were preparing to remount when the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. From the direction of Ward's property, 3 men appeared. Ward himself flanked by his foreman Dawson and another ranch hand. All 3 were armed, their expressions leaving little doubt about their intentions. "Miss Bailey," Ward called as they approached, his voice carrying an edge of triumphant malice. "I see you've discovered my improvements to the waterway." Nora stood her ground, her hand resting near the rifle in her saddle holster. "This is illegal, Ward." "You know as well as I do that water rights are shared." Ward dismounted, walking toward them with the confident stride of a man accustomed to getting his way. "Laws are open to interpretation out here. My interpretation is that the water on my land belongs to me." "The sheriff won't see it that way," Nora countered. Ward laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Collins, he knows which side his bread is buttered on. He might make a show of concern, but nothing will come of it." He moved closer, his bulk intimidating as he towered over Nora. "Be reasonable. You're fighting a losing battle. Take my offer while it still stands." "The answer is still no." Nora's voice remained steady despite her clear anger. Ward's face hardened. "Then prepare to watch your cattle die of thirst and your crops wither in the fields. This is just the beginning." Vaughn stepped forward, positioning himself between Ward and Nora. "You're making a mistake, Ward. Water theft is a hanging offense in some territories. Is that a threat, Zimmerman? Ward's hand moved to rest on his holstered pistol. I've been asking around about you. Seems you've got quite a past. Wyoming ring any bells? Vaughn felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. So Collins had found something after all and shared it with Ward. My past isn't relevant to your water theft. Ward smiled unpleasantly. Oh, but it is. See, a man wanted for murder in Wyoming has no standing to accuse others of wrongdoing. In fact, he'd be wise to move on before someone decides to collect the bounty on his head. Nora glanced at Vaughn, concern evident in her expression, but she quickly returned her attention to Ward. Whatever you think you know about Mr. Zimmerman's past, it doesn't change the fact that you're stealing water that legally belongs to both properties. Your concern is touching, Miss Bailey, Ward mocked, defending a killer. What would your sainted parents think? Vaughn's hand moved to his holstered revolver, his patience wearing thin. You've made your point, Ward. Now I suggest you and your men leave before this conversation takes a turn you won't like. The tension in the air was palpable as the two men faced each other, neither willing to back down. Ward's two companions had spread out slightly, their hands near their weapons, ready to draw at their employer's command. The standoff might have escalated further had not the sound of another approaching rider broken the tension. All eyes turned to see Sheriff Collins riding toward them, his expression grim as he took in the confrontational scene. "Gentlemen," he called as he approached. "Miss Bailey, is there a problem here?" Ward immediately adopted a more civil tone. "No problem, Sheriff. Just a disagreement about property improvements." "He's damming the creek," Nora stated bluntly, gesturing toward the structure. "Cutting off water to my south pasture in violation of territorial water rights." Collins dismounted, looking from the dam to the assembled group with a weary expression. "Mr. Ward, you know shared waterways can't be diverted to the detriment of adjacent properties." Ward's face reddened with anger. "This is my land. The dam is on my property." "The law is clear," Collins replied firmly. "Shared waterways remain shared regardless of whose land they cross." "That dam needs to come down." For a moment, Ward looked as though he might argue further, but then he shrugged with exaggerated nonchalance. "If you say so, Sheriff, though I think you might be more concerned with the wanted fugitive standing right there." He pointed at Vaughn. "Did you check those Wyoming notices like I suggested?" Collins turned his attention to Vaughn, his expression revealing nothing. "I did receive some information from the Wyoming territorial authorities. We'll discuss that matter privately, Mr. Zimmerman." Vaughn nodded, maintaining a calm exterior despite the implications. "Whenever you're ready, Sheriff." "For now," Collins continued, returning his focus to Ward, "my concern is this illegal dam. I expect it to be dismantled by sundown tomorrow, Mr. Ward. Otherwise, I'll be forced to take official action." Ward's face darkened with suppressed rage, but he nodded stiffly. "As you wish, Sheriff, though I think your priorities are questionable." "My priority is upholding the law," Collins replied evenly. "All of it, not just the parts that suit particular interests." With a final glare at Nora and Vaughn, Ward remounted his horse. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low enough that only they could hear. Then he wheeled his horse around and rode back toward his property, his men following. Once they were out of earshot, Collins turned to Vaughn. "We need to talk, Mr. Zimmerman, in private." Nora stepped forward. "Whatever you have to say to him, you can say in front of me." Collins considered her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. I received information from Wyoming Territory regarding a Vaughn Zimmerman wanted for the murders of 3 men on the Triple R Ranch 4 years ago." He fixed Vaughn with a steady gaze. "Is that you?" Vaughn met the sheriff's eyes without flinching. I worked at the Triple R. I did not murder those men, though I was accused of it. The notice is quite specific, Collins pressed. 3 counts of murder, arson, attempted murder of a family of 5. The family I was ordered to burn out, Vaughn explained, his voice tense with suppressed anger. The family I warned instead, which is why Randall Russell, the ranch owner, turned on me. The men who died were killed on Russell's orders when they tried to stop him from murdering me for my disobedience. Collins absorbed this information, his expression thoughtful. That's quite a different story from the official account. It's the truth, Vaughn stated simply. Russell had the territorial judge in his pocket along with half the local law enforcement. My only choice was to run. He's been helping me, Nora interjected. Protecting me from Ward's intimidation. He's not the man described in those wanted notices. Collins looked between them, noting their unified stance. I see. He sighed heavily. Ward has been pushing me to arrest you, Mr. Zimmerman. Says it's my duty to enforce the law regarding fugitives. And will you? Vaughn asked calmly, though his body tensed in preparation for what might come next. The sheriff was silent for a long moment. I've known Maxwell Ward for 15 years, he finally said. In that time, I've seen how he operates. Always within the letter of the law, but rarely within its spirit. He gestured toward the dam. This is the first time he's overstepped so blatantly. He's desperate, Nora suggested. He wants my land and can't understand why I won't sell. Collins nodded slowly. Miss Bailey, your parents were good people. Honest, hardworking. I respected them greatly. He turned back to Vaughn. As for you, Mr. Zimmerman, I have a duty to investigate wanted notices that come across my desk, but I also have a duty to seek justice, not just enforce the law blindly. What are you saying, Sheriff? Vaughn asked. I'm saying I'd like to hear your full story. Not here, not now, but soon. If what you say about Russell is true, there might be ways to address the situation that don't involve me arresting you. He mounted his horse, settling into the saddle. In the meantime, I suggest you both keep a close eye on your property. Ward won't take this setback lightly. With that, he tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Nora and Vaughn to process this unexpected turn of events. You think he believes you? Nora asked as they watched the sheriff disappear over the rise. I'm not sure, Vaughn admitted, but he's not taking Ward's word as gospel, which gives us some breathing room. Nora turned to face him fully. You could still leave, if the sheriff decides to enforce the Wyoming warrant. I'm not running, Vaughn stated firmly. Not this time, not from Ward, not from the past. He reached out, taking her hand in his. Not from this. The connection between them had grown steadily over the weeks, evolving from cautious respect to friendship, to something deeper neither had fully acknowledged until now. As they stood beside the disputed creek, the late summer sun beating down on them, the unspoken feelings between them finally found expression in the gentle pressure of his hand holding hers. We should move the cattle, Nora said after a moment, though she made no move to release his hand. Even if Ward removes the dam tomorrow as ordered, I don't trust him not to try something else. Vaughn nodded, reluctantly letting go of her hand. You're right, and we should talk to Eduardo, warn him about Ward's escalation. As they mounted their horses to return to the main ranch, Vaughn felt a curious lightness despite the dangers that surrounded them. For the first time in years, he wasn't facing his problems alone. More importantly, he had found someone worth fighting for. The following days brought an uneasy calm. True to the sheriff's order, the dam was removed, restoring water flow to Nora's south pasture. Ward made no further overt moves, though Vaughn noticed increased activity along the property boundaries, riders watching from a distance. Tracks indicating nighttime patrols. Vaughn met with Sheriff Collins as promised, relating the full story of his time at the Triple R and the events that had led to his flight from Wyoming. Whether the sheriff entirely believed him remained unclear, but Collins took extensive notes and promised to make inquiries with colleagues who might have information about Randall Russell's operations. "Russell's powerful," Collins cautioned as their meeting concluded, "but not untouchable. If there's evidence supporting your version of events, it might be possible to clear your name. In the meantime, I'm not inclined to enforce a warrant I have reason to question." It wasn't freedom from his past, but it was more hope than Vaughn had allowed himself in years. As summer began its gradual transition to autumn, he found himself increasingly settled at the Bailey Ranch, the thought of continuing to California fading with each passing day. His relationship with Nora deepened as they worked side by side, facing Ward's threats together. The moments of connection multiplied, hands touching while passing tools, conversations that lasted late into the evening, shared laughter over simple joys. Though neither had spoken openly of their feelings, the understanding between them was clear to anyone who saw them together. Eduardo, watching their growing closeness with quiet approval, finally commented one evening as he prepared to leave for his cabin. "Miss Nora smiles more now," he observed to Vaughn. "It has been too long since she smiled so freely." Vaughn, caught off guard by the old man's directness, merely nodded. "You are good for her," Eduardo continued, "and she for you, I think." "She's remarkable," Vaughn acknowledged. "Stronger than most men I've known." Eduardo smiled knowingly. "Strength is good. But even the strong need someone to share the burden." He mounted his horse with the careful movements of age. "My wife, God rest her soul, was my strength for 40 years. We were stronger together than apart." With those parting words, he rode away, leaving Vaughn to consider their implications. The idea of permanence, of building a life with Nora, had taken root in his heart despite his attempts to guard against such attachments. The question that remained was whether such a life was possible with the shadows of his past still looming. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Vaughn finally gave voice to the thoughts that had been occupying him. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low and serious, "about California." Nora tensed beside him, though she kept her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Oh, I'm not going," he said simply. "Not unless you want me to leave." She turned to him then, surprise and cautious hope in her eyes. "What about clearing your name? What about the fresh start you were seeking?" "I'm beginning to think I've already found it," Vaughn replied, holding her gaze. "Here. With you." The words hung between them, honest and unadorned. Nora's breath caught, her eyes searching his face for any sign of uncertainty. "Vaughn," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want you to stay out of obligation, or because you feel responsible for protecting me from Ward. That's not why." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "I'm staying because for the first time in years, I've found something that feels like home. Someone who makes me want to stop running and start building." Nora's free hand reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his weathered cheek. "I never expected you," she admitted. "When I saw you limping across my yard that day, I only thought to help a wounded stranger. I never imagined that I'd be so difficult to get rid of," Vaughn suggested with a smile. She laughed softly. "That I'd find myself hoping you'd never leave." The confession, so simply stated yet profound in its implications, settled between them like a promise. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Vaughn leaned closer. When their lips met, it was with the gentle certainty of two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, strength matching strength, courage recognizing courage, two independent spirits choosing to be stronger together. The kiss deepened, conveying months of unspoken feelings and shared struggles. When they finally parted, Nora rested her forehead against his, her eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. "Stay," she whispered. "Not just for now, but for good." "I will," Vaughn promised, his arms encircling her. "Whatever comes, Ward, my past, anything, we'll face it together." As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the porch, planning a future neither had dared imagine weeks ago. The challenges ahead were real. Ward's continued threats, the unresolved matter of Vaughn's wanted status, but faced together, they seemed less insurmountable than before. The following weeks brought both progress and new tensions. Sheriff Collins reported that his inquiries about Randall Russell had yielded interesting information. Russell was under investigation for land fraud and intimidation by federal authorities, lending credence to Vaughn's claims about the man's criminal activities. "It might take time," Collins cautioned during one of his now regular visits to the ranch, "but there's a real possibility of clearing your name, especially if other former employees of Russell come forward with similar stories." This hopeful news was balanced by increasing pressure from Ward, who seemed determined to force Nora to sell despite the sheriff's warnings. Cattle continued to go missing, fences were cut, and ominous tracks indicated nighttime incursions onto the Bailey property. Vaughn and Eduardo maintained vigilant patrols, and Nora never rode out alone, but the constant tension was wearing. The approaching cattle drive to the autumn market added additional stress. The herd was smaller than planned due to the missing animals, and the drive itself would leave the ranch vulnerable with fewer defenders present. "I could stay behind," Vaughn suggested as they discussed the upcoming drive. "You and Eduardo take the cattle to market with the hired hands. I'll keep watch here." Nora shook her head firmly. "No, Ward would see it as an opportunity. One man alone, even you, couldn't defend against whatever he might try." She paced the kitchen, thinking, "We need another solution." The solution came unexpectedly from Sheriff Collins, who proposed deputizing several trustworthy men to patrol the area during the cattle drive, paying particular attention to both the Bailey Ranch and Ward's activities. "I can't prove he's behind the harassment," Collins explained, "but I can make it clear that any further incidents will be thoroughly investigated. It might give him pause, at least while you're at market." With this assurance, preparations for the cattle drive continued. On the morning of their departure, Vaughn found Nora in the barn, checking saddle straps with methodical attention. "Everything's ready," he told her. "Eduardo has the herd gathered at the south pasture. The men from town arrived an hour ago." Nora nodded, her movements betraying the tension she felt. "This is the first drive without my father," she confessed. "He always led them. I've participated but never been in charge." "You're ready," Vaughn assured her. "You know this land, these cattle, better than anyone." She smiled gratefully, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "With you and Eduardo beside me, I believe we can do this." "We can," Vaughn agreed, pulling her into a brief embrace. "And when we return, we'll deal with Ward once and for all." The cattle drive, though challenging, proved successful. The smaller herd commanded excellent prices at market, providing Nora with the funds needed to sustain the ranch through winter and make necessary improvements. Throughout the journey, Vaughn watched Nora's confidence grow as she directed the operation with natural authority, earning the respect of the hired hands through her knowledge and decisiveness. Their return to the ranch 5 days later brought both relief and concern. Sheriff Collins met them on the road, his expression grim. "There's been trouble," he informed them without preamble. "Ward's foreman, Dawson, and 2 of his men were caught on your property last night. My deputies intercepted them near the main house." Nora's face paled. What were they doing? Carrying coal, oil, and matches, Collins replied grimly. They're in my jail now, but they're not talking. Claiming they were just passing through got lost. Vaughn's hand clenched on his saddle horn. And Ward claims no knowledge of their intentions. Says if they were planning anything illegal, it was on their own initiative. Collins's skepticism was evident in his tone. Without their testimony implicating him, I can only hold them for trespassing. He was going to burn us out, Nora said, her voice steady despite the horror of the realization. Just like you were ordered to do to that family in Wyoming. Vaughn nodded, the parallel not lost on him. But this time they were caught. That changes things. Collins agreed. Ward knows I'm watching him now. His men are facing charges, however minor. It's a setback for him, though I doubt he'll give up entirely. What do we do now? Nora asked, looking between the two men. We finish what we started, Vaughn said firmly. We build our future and defend what's ours. Ward may not give up, but neither will we. The following days brought a flurry of activity as they resettled after the cattle drive and assessed the ranch for any damage during their absence. Though Ward's men had been prevented from carrying out their arson attempt, there were signs of other minor sabotage, a broken pump handle here. A gate left open there, nothing catastrophic but clear indications that their problems with the neighboring rancher were far from resolved. A week after their return, Sheriff Collins arrived with news that brought the situation to a head. He found Nora and Vaughn in the barn, repairing tack in preparation for the winter months ahead. Ward's men have been released, he announced without preamble. Paid their fine for trespassing and walked free this morning. Vaughn's expression hardened. No surprise there. There's more, Collins continued. I received a telegram from Wyoming. The federal investigation into Randall Russell has expanded. They're looking for witnesses to testify against him, including former employees who might have information about his illegal activities. Nora looked at Vaughn, understanding dawning in her eyes. This could clear your name, Collins nodded. If you're willing to testify about what you witnessed at the R, it could go a long way toward establishing your innocence in those deaths. Vaughn absorbed this information, emotions warring within him. The chance to clear his name after years of running was almost too much to hope for. Yet it would mean leaving Nora, traveling to Wyoming to provide testimony with no guarantee of the outcome. How soon would I need to leave? He asked, his voice carefully controlled. The federal prosecutor would want to speak with you as soon as possible, Collins replied. Though the actual trial might be months away. Nora touched Vaughn's arm, her expression resolute. You have to go. This might be your only chance to put the past behind you completely. Vaughn covered her hand with his own, drawing strength from her touch. I won't leave you alone with Ward still a threat. I won't be alone, she reminded him. Eduardo is here and Sheriff Collins has proven he takes his duties seriously. She smiled, though her eyes betrayed her concern. Besides, I managed before you arrived, remember. This is different, Vaughn insisted. Ward's desperate now. Who knows what he might try next? Their discussion was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses, multiple riders coming fast. All three moved to the barn entrance in time to see Maxwell Ward and 4 of his men ride into the yard, Ward in the lead with a cold determination on his face. Bailey, he called, reining in his horse with a sharp jerk. Time to end this foolishness. I have papers here, he patted his breast pocket, ready for your signature. $5,000 for this worthless patch of dirt, which is more than generous considering the troubles you've had. Nora stepped forward, her spine straight and her chin raised defiantly. My answer hasn't changed, Ward. The ranch is not for sale, not to you, not to anyone. Ward's face darkened with anger. You stupid, stubborn woman. Do you think I don't know why you're holding out? Sentimentality, your parents' dream. He spat the word like a curse. Dreams don't water cattle or mend fences. Dreams don't protect you from the realities of this land. She's not alone, Vaughn stated, moving to stand beside Nora. Sheriff Collins completed their line, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered pistol. Ward's eyes narrowed as he took in the united front before him. So that's how it is. The fugitive murderer and the interfering lawman protecting the helpless woman, he laughed humorlessly. How noble, how utterly pointless. State your business and be gone, Ward, Collins said firmly. You're trespassing on private property. My business is with Miss Bailey, Ward replied, his voice hardening. One last chance. Take the offer, sign the papers, walk away with your dignity and a tidy sum. Otherwise. He let the threat hang in the air. Otherwise what? Vaughn challenged, stepping slightly forward. You'll send more men with coal oil in the night, steal more cattle, cut more fences. Those tactics have failed you so far. Ward's face flushed with rage. You think you've won because you caught a few of my men. Because the sheriff here is temporarily on your side, you've won nothing. He pointed a thick finger at Nora. This land will be mine, one way or another. No, Maxwell, it won't. Nora's voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of steel that caused even Ward to pause. This is my home, my legacy. I will defend it with everything I have for as long as I draw breath. Your threats, your sabotage, your intimidation, none of it will change that simple fact. For a long moment, Ward simply stared at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Then his expression hardened once more. We'll see about that. He wheeled his horse around sharply. This isn't over. As Ward and his men rode away in a cloud of dust, Sheriff Collins turned to Vaughn and Nora with a grim expression. He's becoming desperate. Desperate men are dangerous. What do you suggest? Nora asked, her eyes still fixed on the retreating riders. Vigilance, Collins replied, and perhaps accelerating our plans regarding Wyoming. He turned to Vaughn. If you're willing to testify, I can arrange for protection during your journey and stay there. The sooner Russell faces justice, the sooner you can return without the shadow of those false accusations hanging over you. Vaughn looked at Nora, torn between the need to clear his name and his reluctance to leave her vulnerable. I won't go until we've dealt with Ward. Nora shook her head, her decision clear. No, your chance to clear your name might not come again. I've faced Ward's kind before and survived. I'll do so again. Not alone, Collins interjected. I'll assign a deputy to patrol regularly, and I'll speak with some of the other small ranchers who have had troubles with Ward. It's time they stood together against his bullying. Their discussion continued into the evening, weighing options and forming plans. By the time Collins departed, a decision had been reached. Vaughn would travel to Wyoming to testify, but not immediately. They would use the next 2 weeks to strengthen the ranch's defenses, reach out to neighboring small ranchers for mutual support against Ward, and prepare for Vaughn's temporary absence. That night, as they sat before the fire in the main house, the weight of the impending separation hung heavy between them. Nora rested her head against Vaughn's shoulder, her hand clasped in his. I'll come back, he promised, his voice low and fervent. As soon as I've given my testimony, I'll return to you. I know, Nora replied, though worry edged her voice. But Wyoming is far and legal proceedings can drag on. It could be months. Not too long for what waits at the end, Vaughn assured her, turning to face her fully. Nora, when I return, I want us to make this official. If you'll have me, I want to build a life with you here, on this land you love so much. Tears gathered in Nora's eyes as she understood what he was proposing. Are you asking me to marry you, Vaughn Zimmerman? "I am," he confirmed, taking both her hands in his. "I know it's not the most romantic timing with all that's happening, and I have little to offer beyond myself and my commitment to stand beside you, to build and protect what we share." "But if that's enough, it's everything," Nora interrupted, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, my answer is yes." Their kiss sealed the promise, a moment of pure joy amid the uncertainties that surrounded them. When they finally parted, Vaughn reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple silver band. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "The only thing I kept when I left home after the war. I've carried it all these years, never imagining I'd find someone worthy of wearing it." Nora stared at the ring, then back at Vaughn's face. "I'll treasure it," she promised, "and I'll be waiting when you return, no matter how long it takes." The following 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity, as they prepared both for Vaughn's journey and for whatever Ward might attempt in his absence. Sheriff Collins arranged for Vaughn to travel with a federal marshal who was passing through on his way to Wyoming territory, providing an added layer of protection for the journey. Neighboring small ranchers, alerted to Ward's escalating tactics, agreed to keep watch on the Bailey property and provide assistance if needed. Eduardo moved temporarily into the main house for added security, and the ranch was made as defensible as possible. The morning of Vaughn's departure dawned clear and cold, the first hint of autumn crispness in the air. He and Nora stood on the porch, their goodbye private following a more formal farewell to Eduardo and Sheriff Collins. "Remember your promise," Nora said, her arms tight around Vaughn's waist as they embraced one final time. "Come back to me." "Nothing could keep me away," he vowed, his voice rough with emotion. "Not distance, not time, nothing." Their kiss was both tender and passionate, a physical manifestation of the bond that had grown between them since that first day when she had seen him limping across her yard. When they finally parted, Nora pressed something into his hand, a small daguerreotype of herself that Eduardo had arranged to have taken in town the previous week. "So you don't forget what you're coming home to," she explained with a tremulous smile. Vaughn tucked the precious image into his inner pocket, close to his heart. "As if I could ever forget." With a final embrace, he mounted his horse and joined the waiting federal marshal. As they rode away, Vaughn turned once in the saddle, raising his hand in a final farewell. Nora stood on the porch, her hand lifted in response, her figure growing smaller as distance separated them. The journey to Wyoming was long but uneventful, the federal marshal providing both protection and companionship along the way. Upon their arrival, Vaughn found himself immersed in legal proceedings, giving statements, identifying evidence, preparing for the eventual trial of Randall Russell. His testimony, along with that of several other former employees who had come forward, painted a damning picture of Russell's criminal enterprises and the murders he had orchestrated. The federal prosecutor was confident that the charges against Vaughn would be dropped once the full extent of Russell's crimes became public. Meanwhile, back at the Bailey Ranch, Nora faced her own challenges. True to form, Ward increased his pressure once Vaughn had departed, clearly believing that without her protector, Nora would finally relent and sell. What he failed to understand was the depth of her determination and the support she had cultivated among neighboring ranchers. When Ward's men cut her fence lines, neighbors helped repair them. When cattle went missing, Sheriff Collins investigated promptly. When threatening notes were left on her porch, Eduardo maintained night watches. Each attempt at intimidation was met with resolute resistance and community support. Letters traveled between Wyoming and the Bailey Ranch, carrying news and reassurances in both directions. Vaughn wrote of the progress in building the case against Russell, of his growing confidence that his name would be cleared. Nora wrote of her daily struggles and triumphs, of the support from neighbors, of her unwavering determination to defend their future home. The weeks stretched into months as winter descended on the west. In Wyoming, snow and legal delays prolonged Vaughn's stay. At the Bailey Ranch, Nora faced the harsh season with characteristic resilience, finding strength in the promise of Vaughn's return and their planned future together. By early spring, significant developments had occurred on both fronts. In Wyoming, Randall Russell was finally brought to trial, facing multiple charges of murder, fraud, and intimidation. Vaughn's testimony was pivotal in securing indictments, and the prosecutor formally requested that all charges against Vaughn be dismissed in light of the evidence showing Russell's guilt and Vaughn's innocence. At the Bailey Ranch, the situation with Ward came to a head in an unexpected way. Following a particularly severe winter storm, one of Ward's prize bulls broke through a damaged fence and became stranded in a ravine on Nora's property. Despite their ongoing conflict, Nora organized a rescue effort, enlisting Eduardo and neighboring ranchers to save the valuable animal. The act of compassion, widely discussed throughout the area, placed Ward in an uncomfortable position. To continue his campaign of harassment after Nora had saved his prized bull would make him appear ungrateful and petty in the eyes of the community, a consideration that mattered to a man who prided himself on his standing among fellow ranchers. The day Vaughn finally returned to the Bailey Ranch was one of those perfect spring days that seemed to herald new beginnings. The land was greening after winter's grip. Wildflowers dotted the meadows, and the air carried the scent of promise and renewal. Nora was in the yard when he rode in, having received word from Sheriff Collins that Vaughn was on his way home. She stood frozen for a moment as he dismounted, drinking in the sight of him after months of separation. Then she was running, and he was catching her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that spoke of all the longing and love that had sustained them through their time apart. "You're here," she whispered against his neck, tears of joy streaming down her face. "You're finally here." "I told you nothing could keep me away," Vaughn replied, his own voice thick with emotion as he set her gently on her feet but kept his arms around her. Eduardo, who had been working nearby, approached with a broad smile, extending his hand to Vaughn. "Welcome home, Senor. It is good to see you return safely." "It's good to be back," Vaughn replied, clasping the old man's hand firmly. "I hear you've all been busy in my absence." "There is much to tell," Eduardo confirmed, "but perhaps over dinner. Miss Nora has been preparing since word came of your arrival." That evening, over a celebratory meal, Vaughn shared the news of his legal vindication. The charges against him had been officially dismissed. Russell had been convicted and sentenced to prison, and Vaughn Zimmerman was finally a free man, his name cleared and his past no longer a shadow over his future. In turn, Nora related the developments with Ward, the rescue of his bull, the gradual cessation of his harassment, and finally, the unexpected visit he had paid her just a week before Vaughn's return. "He came alone," she explained, refilling Vaughn's coffee cup. "No threats, no demands. He acknowledged that saving his bull was decent of me, and then he made a final offer for the ranch higher than before, but still an offer." "And you refused," Vaughn stated, knowing her too well to doubt her response. Nora nodded. "I did, but something had changed in his manner. When I refused, he simply nodded as if he had expected no less." She smiled, still somewhat bemused by the encounter. "Then he said something odd. He said your father would be proud, stubborn as he was, but proud." "A compliment from Maxwell Ward," Vaughn raised an eyebrow in surprise. Of sorts, Nora agreed. Before he left, he mentioned that he's considering selling the Diamond W and moving his operation to Texas. Said there's more opportunity there, less competition. You believe him? Vaughn asked, skeptical of such a convenient resolution. Nora considered the question. I'm not sure, but Sheriff Collins confirmed that Ward has been making inquiries about large ranches for sale in Texas. It could be true. Whether Ward stays or goes, Vaughn said, reaching across the table to take her hand, we'll face whatever comes together. No more separations. Later that night, as they stood on the porch beneath a star-filled sky, Vaughn renewed his proposal formally, kneeling before Nora despite her protests that such ceremony wasn't necessary between them. "Humor me," he said with a smile. "I've waited months to do this properly." He took her hand, the silver band still in place on her finger. "Nora Bailey, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me on this land you've fought so hard to keep? Will you face whatever the future holds by my side as I promise to face it by yours?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, drawing him to his feet. "Today, tomorrow, always. Yes." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony attended by Eduardo, Sheriff Collins, and the neighboring ranchers who had stood by Nora during the difficult months of Vaughn's absence. The celebration afterward was joyful but modest, reflecting the practical nature of the couple and the working ranch that was their home. As spring turned to summer, they settled into their shared life with a happiness neither had dared hope for when they first met. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Vaughn's experience complementing Nora's knowledge of the land and its needs. Together, they weathered the challenges inherent in ranch life: drought, illness among the livestock, the constant work of maintaining and improving the property. Maxwell Ward did indeed sell his ranch that autumn, moving his operation to Texas as he had indicated. His departure removed the most significant threat to their security, allowing them to focus fully on building their future without the constant specter of conflict. 5 years after Vaughn had first limped across Nora's yard, their family had grown to include twin boys, Daniel and Thomas, who at 3 years old were already showing signs of inheriting their parents' determination and resilience. The ranch had expanded modestly, incorporating a small adjacent property when its elderly owner decided to retire to town. Eduardo remained with them, now more family than employee, delighting in his role as honorary grandfather to the twins. Though age had slowed his movements, his wisdom and experience remained invaluable to the ranch's operations. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Vaughn and Nora made a tradition of sitting on the porch after the children were asleep, remembering the unlikely circumstances that had brought them together. "I was so suspicious of you," Nora recalled with a laugh as they watched the sunset. A wounded stranger appearing out of nowhere, refusing help until it was accepted or collapse. "And I was determined to move on as quickly as possible," Vaughn added, his arm around her shoulders. "California seemed so important then. The next destination, the next fresh start." "Little did you know you'd already found it," Nora teased, leaning into his embrace. "Best wrong turn I ever made," Vaughn agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I maintain I wasn't looking for pity." "And I wasn't offering it," Nora completed their familiar exchange. "Just help." "Help that changed everything," Vaughn murmured, gratitude evident in his voice. "For both of us." As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the porch of the home they had defended and nurtured together, their hands clasped as they contemplated the future stretching before them, a future built on the foundation of that first fateful meeting when she saw the cowboy limp across the yard. He said, "I don't need pity," and she said, "I'm offering help." In that moment of compassion and stubborn determination, two lives had intersected and been forever altered, proving that sometimes the most meaningful journeys aren't about reaching a distant destination, but about finding the courage to stand still long enough to let love take root and grow.